So yeah. So the islands, this is a state. This is a chart for the state. Most of the states, oil is coming from foreign sources. I think actually this data is from 2000 and up to 2009, and we've heard anecdotally that we don't have data that supports this, but we've heard that that 2% has disappeared entirely, so now it's 100% compliant. And this dependency is exacerbated by the island's location, which this is a chart from BP, the oil company. This shows the flows of oil around the world, and you can see that none of these flows are going through the Pacific Ocean. So we're kind of at the end of the supply chain, and we don't have a lot of market power, and we're completely dependent on oil, and this exacerbates the situation. This is us. And then here's how it breaks out in the electricity sector. About 35% of the delivered electricity is from renewable sources. The balance comes from petroleum. Unfortunately, electricity customers don't see the benefits of renewable resources in the form of lower rates, and this is because the renewable resource, the contracts are tied to the price of oil. The producers are paid based on the cost of petroleum, not on the actual cost of generation. What happens here is, I guess what we're trying to show here is that because we have these long-term contracts with renewable producers that are locking in electricity at high rates that are going up, and also because the rate structure that the PUC has approved leaves all of the oil price risk on the customer side. This is all basically the point is that all of this is coming back to the customer, and you can see this kind of getting worse and worse, I think, over time. Electricity here costs 35% more than it costs on Oahu, and it costs 300% more than it costs on the mainland. And about 62% of Helco's expenses, as a percentage of the revenues, are for energy, which are,
So is the transmission and distribution expense, you're saying is 3%?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what is that? Like, what do you mean by expense? Like, what are you saying there?
That's the amount of money that Helco reports that they spend on transmission and distribution expense.
It's like linemen out there, maintaining, repairing, installing.
That's the operation and maintenance expense for T&D. About $8 million. It's about $10 million. $8 million is for the distribution side.
Wouldn't you think with the largest transmission runs, it would be higher?
It's a capital expense. So this is a O&M expense.
Okay.
You're right, the large capital expenditure is put in the transmission distribution system.
Not bad.
Right. As far as the O&M part of it.
As far as an asset value, transmission comprises what of the Helco asset
I'm
valuation?
not sure.
Quite a bit.
It's quite a bit.
More than any other island.
It could be. I don't know. Off the top of my head. I can check for you.
Please.
These two charts show kind of the impact of high energy prices. It's about 30 or 35% more expensive per capita on this island than it is statewide or in the U.S. And the impact of high energy costs are felt, acutely by low-income residents. They spend a very high percentage of their income on energy compared to other income groups. In addition, the high energy costs have impacts on businesses, and about commercial customers pay on average about $12,000 a year in electricity. Industrial users spend almost $1 million every year on their electricity bill, on average. And the attractiveness of energy self-reliance has only increased because of the cost of energy. So we see skyrocketing electricity rates, and we see, exponential growth in folks that want to sign up for their own energy production, customer-sided generation.
Do you have any fidelity on what income group comprises the PV installations? Like, could you do a demographic on
who buys PV?
Yeah, the income disparity.
I'm not aware of any data that
Yeah, that would be hard.
Yeah, I don't know of any that would tell you the income distributions of folks that are signing up for this. It's not something that's collected by the utility that I'm aware of.
Maybe you can look geographically, because we know different areas, different income areas around the island, and if it's clustered in certain areas, that might give you a little bit more.
That's a good point. I think, that's an interesting approach to take. I don't know how much you could stand behind, just based on someone's street, how much they make. But that definitely is an interesting way. We can
Surprisingly though, there's a pretty even distribution on the kilo side, one side, similar numbers. So that'd be hard to decipher data to have there, even on a given electrical circuit. We've got all of the sides. I think it would be a good exercise to have, but where do you find that data?
The utility does publish the locations of where PV is kind of exceeding more than 10 or 15% of the circuit peak demand as a map. But I don't know if we could. We can look at that data and see if there's something that we can do there.
I was just going to suggest that we might find some marketing data nationally. There may be some folks who inform the industry about that nationally, and we can look for that.
The solar, you can get rebates, federal rebates, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you could possibly get information in relationship to people's tax bracket in relationship to those at, for the rebates. So that data would be available. So you could, whether the IRS or the state will release that data, but they might release it if it's not directly attached to locations or people saying, people filing over 150,000 have, 2% of them have asked for rebates, et cetera, because they're the ones. That's how you could get that data.
That's a good suggestion.
For the salary.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion for the state, because if we could get state data, the state will have it. And there were some legislators that were at the state level trying to address this issue of equity, and we may be able to contact them for data.
So this graph indicates some of the challenges particularly on the electricity sector side. Interconnection of variable renewable energy like solar is potentially problematic for the utility. It's a challenge. The grid is aging. It needs upgrading, needs modernization. This kind of electricity generation is distributed generation. The grid is not designed. The entire power system is not designed for substantial amounts of distributed generation. It's designed for centralized generation. And also, like we were just talking about, the financial impacts of these patterns are potentially problematic, not just for low-income folks who maybe don't have the resources to get these kinds of benefits. Like I said before, businesses that spend a large chunk of their revenues on electricity, but also the utility. This is a potential issue for the utility's business model as well. So all these things are on the power grid side are potential challenges.
There is one thing too. There's sort of a group of PV people who are under the radar. Why? Because they built homes that don't have permits, so they couldn't get electricity anyway. Some of these people have very sophisticated PV systems. They were forced to So you might put some factor in of, you know, a certain percentage of unofficial, so to speak,
Right.
or guesstimate of that.
We don't have reliable data on the number of off-grid solar installations on the island. We've heard that, you know, there may be 6,000 or so out there.
Equaling how many KW? Or
Unknown. But that's, you know, 6,000 is maybe 10% of the households on the island, so that's potentially a substantial number of off-grid systems. But it's, you know, obviously there's a reason, you know, as you said, if it's unpermitted, you know, they don't want folks knowing about, you know, government folks or folks that are collecting data about that. So we haven't found reliable data on that yet, but okay, so transportation is as a whole nother beast. I think the electricity sector gets a lot of attention, but the thing is that there's a variety of renewable technologies for the electricity sector that are commercialized. Their costs are lower than the cost of generation from petroleum sources in many cases, in most cases. And as we see more of those renewable technologies be added to the electricity side of the energy system, the importance of the transportation side is only going to get bigger and bigger. And the solutions on that side are just not there yet, in the same way that they are for the electricity side. So this is something that I think deserves a lot. We think the transportation sector deserves a lot of attention, and fortunately, it's an area where the county has more control, though not perfect control, but certainly more control than they have over the electricity side. Some of the challenges on the transportation side: Hawaii has the lowest vehicle efficiency performance of any island in the state. I should say any county in the state. Also, the population is very low density on this island, which necessitates longer trips. The island has a high proportion of light-duty trucks, higher than other islands and other places. And obviously, trucks are popular. I think the data that we have shows that almost 60% of new vehicle purchases are trucks, which is a high percentage. Also, the terrain is rugged. We don't, getting from Hilo side to Kona side, necessitates a lot of climbing for the vehicle. And vehicles don't really go anywhere once they get here. So, obviously that's an exaggeration, but the vehicle turnover rate is very low for this island. It exceeds 25 years. It may be as high as 50 years when we have. It depends on how many new car sales there are, of course, but it takes a long time for the vehicle stock to be completely cycled. So even if we could buy every electric vehicle in existence and give them away, it would take, people just aren't buying vehicles enough, and actually they don't even make enough electric vehicles yet to do that. So, and finally, the sector is completely dependent on petroleum. There aren't, like I said before, there aren't a lot of good solutions, and so this is a big challenge.
So wouldn't that lend you to converting existing vehicles, engines, like taking the existing vehicle and converting it? Wouldn't that be a solution?
It's a potential solution. It's something that we've identified as maybe it's something that could work on the island. Maybe it's something that folks would be into in a way. Maybe it could be like a growth industry or something where, people are converting their vehicles to be either to electric drive or to be able to accommodate, renewable fuels, alternative fuels. That right now most vehicles, can't do that. There's no real good evidence that that would take off or be a real solution. There's 172,000 vehicles, registered vehicles on the island, and the electric vehicles are it's a technical they're technical, they're machines, and they require a lot of expertise to be able to use safely, and so it's something that we're looking at, but I don't know how big of a piece of the solution it will be.
I think on the issue of converting existing vehicles, it's costly. If you go to a bank with a used vehicle and you want to do that, you're not going to gain money. So people are better to buy new, or they've got and banks would encourage this, right or wrong, than to convert older vehicles, because they're not going to give you big sums of money on a used vehicle for a conversion.
Well,
And it could cost big money to do it.
yeah, I honestly don't know how much it costs to convert vehicles, but again, what are you going to convert it to? If you convert it to electricity, that's the manufacturers are still working out a lot of the kinks about electric vehicles. And if you're converting it to an alternative fuel that's not an electric fuel, well, it's not electricity. What if right now, most, I guess you would think for gasoline engines it would be to ethanol, but we don't make ethanol on the island. We import ethanol, so it's not helpful, from an energy import perspective to do that. So anyway.
The easiest thing is compressed natural gas, which is New Zealand is the leader in that. But they have natural gas as a natural resource. But that's the most cost-effective way to convert a gasoline engine to run more economically.
Right, and again, I think that, that's, unfortunately, we don't have natural gas here either, so we can't really rely on that for energy sustainability. Nonetheless, electric vehicles are, a really promising alternative. Even given Hawaii Island's extraordinary electricity rate, it's still much cheaper on an operating basis to use use electricity. The engines are much more efficient, and on a per mile basis, and you can see how amazingly how much better they are on the national level. But even on Hawaii Island, you're seeing a 20 or 30% improvement. And then on the right this is just a kind of a back of the envelope kind of calculation about how much capacity would need to be installed to have every vehicle mile traveled done by a Nissan Leaf, which is one of the commercialized electric vehicles. And you can see because of the relatively high capacity factor, meaning that it produces close to its nameplate capacity for geothermal, you get much less new capacity would be required to produce that energy than, say, for solar or wind. And the current grid there, that's the 190 peak demand for the island's electric grid. This obviously that doesn't take into account balancing and making sure that the energy arrives at the right time and all that kind of thing. But it's just to give you a sense of scale that we're talking about for 100% of the vehicle mile traveled on the island. So here's just a quick summary of the challenges that that we think are important to consider on the transportation side, on the grid side, and then we haven't talked about the policy side yet, but that's what we're going to talk about next. These are all things to consider going forward.
So that Dave just told you a lot about the analysis we've done. You've seen some of it before, some of it is a little bit newer. But how does this sort of translate into what the county can be doing? We said we want to focus on the county's own ability to act and not sort of needlessly look around to tell everyone else what to do when there's plenty the county can be doing to get itself organized and active in energy sustainability. And so one thing we really wanted to understand was that jurisdiction of the county. And we know it's limited by state law and regulations. We have a state, we have a state constitution, and only certain powers are delegated to the counties. Our taxation authority is limited. Only 3 taxes are given to the county. Property tax, which we all know and love, and the fuel tax, which is allowed to be set by the county, and then the utility franchise fee is also collected by the county. And of course, the main power of the county is to create law and regulation through ordinance and resolution. So we made sure when thinking about possible actions, seeing if there was any ordinance necessary to be involved, or if a resolution was maybe more appropriate. Another power of the county is sort of more on the ground is permitting. The county, is sort of the last line of defense for a lot of projects, big and small. It permits your house, but it also does land use approvals, and site grading, all sorts of construction approvals as well, and it can subject certain projects to extra review depending on its own departmental rules. And then this is related to permitting, but we have building codes. Building codes are explicitly delegated to us by the state. A state law, a bill, HB 2358, tried to take that away from us, but it died. So we still have that. We were a little scared for a moment that we'd lose building codes, but we have them now, and looks like we'll keep them. And of course, as Dave said, transportation infrastructure is a big part. We have mass transits under our control. We build the roads for the most part. We maintain them. We design them, and we can use those methods to pursue new projects. The county facilities are an obvious thing the county has control over, and the meeting today talked quite a bit about that. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities there. Will gave us some numbers that are very promising for what we could be saving in county operations through renewables and energy efficiency. And finally, and this is, I think, sometimes overlooked but extremely important function of the county, is it's not a delegated power. It's not defined by law, but it is sort of the basic function of the county government is to represent the best interest of the residents of the island. And it doesn't always have to do that through legal measures. It can always, put analysis out there, make statements, and just try to understand the issues and to put the resources behind understanding issues that will affect residents and doing the analysis to support the decision making, whether it's inside or outside the county. They can have a voice in the process, whether it's through the state legislature, the PUC, or other processes, or just in general, through sort of basic public relations. So we've identified 3 categories we want to organize our priority actions around. And if you remember from what we presented last time, we are focusing on this 5-year roadmap. We've looked at the long-term vision. Dave sort of talked about some of the ideas of where things can go. But what do we need to be doing in the short term? So we're focusing on a 5-year time frame and hoping that these 3 prongs will be a good way to organize our efforts. So the county can develop innovative and proactive policy. So not just reacting to changes at the state level, but also anticipating changes, making sure it's ready for changes in the market. It can lead by example in county operations. We've said that already. And it can promote energy development and use. So that's getting the private sector to do things the way that are the best for the island. And we're limited in that respect, but we can make efforts there.